Chale. So, next up on our explorative journey through the many forms of nihilism, we encounter epistemological nihilism. What is epistemological nihilism? Epistemological nihilism is a form of skepticism in which all knowledge is accepted as possibly untrue or unable to be known. And right away you can be sure that this form of nihilism, perhaps more than any other, will make people agitated and uncomfortable. Why? Because people like certainty. People don't like the idea of not having their feet planted firmly on the ground. It helps solidify and highlight people's attachments to the known. It's a grounding stake in a security blanket, a pacifier to help the desperate self-soothe in the face of unfathomable universal mystery. It's the urge to seek the feeling of being in control and to wield power and command by way of authoritative disambiguation and dogmatic absolutism. This is what happens when knowledge becomes used and abused as a paraphernalia for the indulgences of certainty, safety, and security. Well, sorry, Charlie. All the knowledge in the entire world compiled together into one great big expansive eclectic collection of complex intellectual understanding is all still but a small rickety raft floating adrift, alone in the deep vast ocean of the great unknown, which is even further overshadowed by the profound and ineffable unknowable. Just as long as we keep in mind that any and all knowledge acquired only applies to the context of the little raft in the mighty sea, even of which is subject to constant debate, change, and perceptual reframing, then we are being more intellectually honest with ourselves. And even if there are certain truths established that could be called universal, or that have 100% consensus among all sentient life, this too is still only confined to the parameters of the little raft. And this is why even true knowledge is untrue, because it is only true knowledge relative to the confines of a framework, even if such framework is the only framework that one has a frame of reference in. It is still only a framework nonetheless. And hence the true knowledge is only applicable to these borders. And this is also why even true knowledge cannot rightfully be said to be really known to be ultimately true. For one cannot say such for certain until they have made an assessment from the widest frame of reference possible, which may not even be reachable from an individual perspective. And also, let us not forget that, on top of all of this, and this is the sweet kicker, even the seemingly certain conclusion of uncertainty is also uncertain. But why? That can't be. We already know everything there is to know about what we are and where we came from. Of course we can be certain. Really? Come on now, man. Really? You are looking at phenomenal content through the lens of externalizing colored glasses, and you actually think you stand some kind of chance at coming to some finalized conclusion based on your efforts of sifting through layers of appearances. All of this came from nothing, and you think you know something? This entire universe is just a grain of sand on a vast beach, and you think you have some kind of grasp on what's going on here? Well, the first thing you must come to understand, in order to understand that you really don't understand very much of anything, is you are not dealing with things as they really are, but are only dealing with an appearance of things. How's that? I said, you are not dealing with things as they really are, but are really only dealing with an appearance of things. This is the minimum of what you can say you know with your acquired knowledge, if you have treated knowledge properly and examined the knowledge and the implications of the knowledge from all angles, including metaphysically. Obviously, things are not quite as they appear on the surface. If the insights of material science has shown us anything, it has shown us this. Materials are really just an assemblage of subatomic particles, which in turn are really just an assemblage of energy, which in turn is really just an assemblage of nothingness. So, what knowledge do you have beyond a narrow sliver of information that just deals with the surface appearance? The very senses, what we use to try to comprehend and organize our knowledge, don't even convey an accurate representation of what is actually there. What you supposedly see only becomes a visual object by way of an eyeball converting energetic configurations into an apparent spatial manifestation. Same goes with what you hear, smell, taste, and touch. What you end up with is merely an appearance of something that has much deeper hidden properties, the bottom of which we have not yet fully explored to understand. And yet you believe you are certain about something that is being brought to your attention via the perceptual senses? To believe as such is called naive realism. But don't misconstrue and jump to the conclusion that any of these statements are meaning to say that there is a complete impossibility of any knowledge. That isn't the point being emphasized here, but rather that knowledge is possible, but it is always relative, always subjective, and always contextual. And why is that? Well, let's look into it. First, why relative? Well, if there would be anything considered an absolute aspect, then obviously it must be an aspect that differs from a relative aspect. If an absolute aspect isn't different than a relative aspect, then it is the same as a relative aspect, and hence relative. But if an absolute aspect is different from a relative aspect, then the absolute aspect must also be relative. For any aspects that are different must be different in contrast to something else. And to be considered different means that the said aspect has to be relative to something. So there's no way around relativity. Simply put, a fact is only a fact relative to a context. And since a context has borders, anything absolute within those borders has no applicability outside the borders. And even if you want to try and break down those borders and say that they don't exist, and that absolute aspects exist in infinity, you are going to run into similar problems. For then where is infinity located? Anything that has no location surely cannot exist as we commonly know and define objectified existence. Facts surely have to have a solid context to be recognized, and to say that facts are absolute yet have no location, which would seem to be a fundamental requirement for an object to exist, is still indicative of facts and absolutism being relative to infinity, despite its borderless configuration. But even if you chalk that off as an intentional oversight, wherein is this infinity even being recognized as an item of consideration? Ah, yes, it is infinity relative to a subject. Which brings us to the second factor to look into, subjectivity. So why subjective? Well, knowledge is only knowledge as it pertains to a subject, by both meanings of the word subject, by means of both the specific topic and to the one who is considering the topic of knowledge. Indeed, knowledge cannot even have any meaningful existence without an existential agency to provide a foundation of such. And any such various agencies are full of their own unique perspectives regarding the information, with different degrees of perception and reasoning, which will vary from person to person, culture to culture, psychology to psychology, and position to position. And even when considering facts that subjects agree are facts, opinions and feelings about the implications of the facts can vary. Because subject A is depressed and pessimistic, he concludes that the fact that there is famine and poverty in the world means that humanity should just set off a nuclear bomb and put an end to the misery. Whereas subject B is happy and optimistic. So he concludes that the fact that there is famine and poverty in the world means that humanity should take active steps towards treating and curing these negative states. Who is right and who is wrong? Or are they both right or both wrong? It depends on who you ask. This is the nature of subjectivity. A fact alone, which cannot be recognized without a subject, does not carry any inherent prescript concerning its handling that is not also based in subjectivity. Even absolute laws are universal truths, if such a thing were even possible, are only so relative to a subject. So there's no way around subjectivity either. And lastly, of course, all knowledge is contextual. And why contextual? Well, this is closely related to relativity and subjectivity, in that knowledge or laws or facts or anything else cannot be featured as such unless they have some kind of framework to sustain them. And just by being contextualized, they are limited to the settings of such contextualizations. So, this being the case, knowledge at best is an island. It is not all-encompassing. Its utility is facilitated existentially and not otherwise. And we can use knowledge existentially for communication, creativity, and exploration. But there's no reason to try and seek certainty, unless our goals are really to try and pin down reality and to control it. To try and pour concrete over an abstract medium. And I know why many of you want to do this, for we see a lot of negativity in our reality. And often our impulses motivate us to try and fix it or to clean it up. But understand that messes and broken aspects are originally caused by the very same impulse and motivation. The desire to attach. The desire to attach the desire to attach, the insatiable craving to want to control circumstances, to be either grasped at and sustained or to be pushed away and avoided. And this is the primary reason people want certainty. Not really so much because they want knowledge, but because certainty deludes one into thinking they can control circumstances to fulfill their desires. But that's all it is, a delusion. In all honesty, you don't really know jack shit. You cannot be certain of anything. And I know this is maddening. I know this is outrageous to the sensibilities of the average modern thinking mind, but it's the raw reality. Yet, this nagging intellectual irritant doesn't necessarily have to be as such. Again, this relates to the default conditioning of the persona, which fosters the tendency to seek familiarity, comfort, and stability, aka attachments, which really only weaken and disempower us. For all of this really only fortifies the borders, which in turn crystallizes the margins into the towering walls of a self-imposed prison. Is this where we really want to be? In the adventure of life, is not our eternal quest to explore, question, and observe? And are these activities not the whole point of the trip? We've often heard it said before that life is a journey and not a destination, and that the spiritual path is the path itself, and not a matter of reaching anywhere. So the question then becomes, why are you not okay with this? What are your priorities, and where did these priorities originate from? Are these inclinations your own, or were they just instilled in you by other people who wanted to shape and mold you to their own instilled standards? If you are here to make the most out of your existential exploration, then stop looking for outside approval, and stop looking externally for power and authority. You are not going to find existential truth in the libraries or in the hierarchies. You don't have to feel the need to emulate and identify with an archetype that you think reflects your self-image. You will have not accomplished anything by finding some knowledge or scripture or philosophical ideology and then preaching it atop a soapbox, wagging your finger at the uninformed, using guilt as a weapon of conformity. Take it easy, Charlie. Relax. Let go of the need to bend others towards a purpose. Whenever we see an ideologue or a theologian who is adamantly imploring us to accept some kind of knowledge or world narrative as an irrefutable truth, it is always more indicative of a troubled psychology than of a sound philosophy. You seem to be aware of an experience of phenomena. Beyond that, it's all narrative, of which is then called knowledge.